Okay, so as I mentioned, the rest of the puzzles are just going to be kind of intuition and hand waving, not really, deeply mathematical and exact modeling. The takeaway so far: trade costs and substitutability between domestic and foreign production, right? So that's the tau and then the theta. That's been a feature of everything we've looked at so far. Those two things together are going to be able to explain these three puzzles. So home bias and trade, again, not that surprising that if you have trade costs, then people are going to consume less of the foreign good. But starting with the Feldstein-Heroica puzzle, these are actually somewhat less intuitive. So again, Feldstein-Heroica says, if I want to borrow abroad or lend abroad, then when I'm lending, because of the way that trade flows are going, if I'm lending, then actually I'm facing a low real exchange rate, and if I'm real interest rate, and if I'm borrowing, I'm facing a high real interest rate. Okay, and then we just saw this home bias in equities. The way that works is it's not so attractive for me to invest abroad because when times are good and I want to consume goods from abroad, I have to pay that trade cost tax, if you like. So even if the countries are symmetric, in some ways it's better for me to invest at home because there I can enjoy the fruits of my investment without having to pay a trade cost, basically. Okay, so this one, just one slide. There's this puzzle that says that if people are diversifying their investments, as we sort of predict they would due to standard theory, or at least standard theory is maybe the wrong word, but sort of intuitively you want to diversify your investments, you're going to invest abroad, then we would expect that consumption would grow at the same rate in every country, right? Because consumption depends on where I invested, and if I have sort of a diversified investment, it doesn't matter which country I'm in, consumption should be growing at the same rate, even if GDP doesn't. Okay, so some countries sometimes are more productive, some are less productive. You could have big fluctuations, but since I want to insure against those risks, I would sort of diversify my portfolio against those GDP risks. So we would expect to see that consumption is going to grow about the same rate everywhere, regardless of GDP. Turns out in the real world, consumption growth and the growth of GDP are very closely correlated. So again, it looks like there's some missing link there, and it turns out you can just use the same model that we talked about with this Feldstein-Heroica puzzle to show that lending is not attractive if you're lending abroad, because it's actually going to harm your terms of trade. It's going to mean that you're facing a low real interest rate because of the reversal of which goods you want to export and import, basically. So that's all to say. That's all there is to say about that. All right, so 5 and 6 are very closely related. So this is the purchasing power parity puzzle, PPPP. So this is about price fluctuations. So the other puzzles we've looked at are all about the real economy. Where do people invest? What's your endowment? These last two puzzles are just going to be about prices. Okay, so if you're talking about prices, you need to think about currency. And if you're thinking about money mattering, you're going to need some sort of rigidities. Okay, otherwise the money doesn't matter. So what is the PPP puzzle? In short, if you look at exchange rates, they're very volatile. It's not unusual for exchange rates to fluctuate 5–10% in the course of a year, just a normal year. Famously for me, not famously for you, but when I moved to Denmark, it was about, I'm going to say it was about 5.3 kroner per dollar. And now it's more like, see, I haven't checked in a while, so I don't know. Last time I looked, it was like 6.5 kroner per dollar. Let me check my phone right now. I actually have no idea what it is. Let's see here, DKK to US dollar. Should have said US dollar to DKK. 6.8. Okay, so $1 is worth 6.8 kroner. So when I accepted my job offer, I was living in the United States, and the dollar was was weaker. So it meant that it seemed like when I was thinking in dollars, my salary was high. And then soon after I arrived in Denmark in like 2014 was when I arrived. Soon after I arrived, like the next year, there was a big change in the dollar sort of gained strength against the kroner and also against the euro. And what it meant was that sort of my dollar salary went down significantly, like 15% or 20%. So suddenly I was like, maybe I shouldn't have accepted this job. Of course, I live in Denmark, so it doesn't matter. But the point is, these exchange rates change all the time. But if we look at sort of the price of a basket of goods in the United States and the price of the same basket of goods in Denmark, the relative price of those two baskets doesn't fluctuate very much. Okay, so it seems like a puzzle, because if the exchange rate is fluctuating all the time and the relative price of a basket of goods is not fluctuating, then shouldn't there be an arbitrage opportunity? Shouldn't I be able to buy goods in one country and ship them to the other country and sell them for a profit? You know, suppose that that's impossible, and then suddenly the Danish kroner gains 10% against the dollar. Suddenly, I should be buying stuff in the United States, sending it to Denmark, and selling it for a profit. Okay, and not only does that not happen, but it can take a really long time for relative prices to sort of catch up with exchange rates. So, I mean, that's the puzzle in a nutshell. And then, just more generally, exchange rates are very volatile, and everything else is not quite as volatile. So we look at sort of the relative inflation rates, relative interest rates in countries, relative productivity shocks in two countries. Those all change at a much slower time scale than exchange rates. So it's similar to this PPP puzzle. You know, what is causing these exchange rates to be so jumpy? And how can they be so jumpy in the face of these other things being very stable? Okay, so those are the puzzles. Now, here's what I'm going to say for the solution. It's very little, because it's just kind of hand-wavy. So what they argue in the paper is that trade costs alone aren't enough. You need to have different trade costs for different parts of society. So they make this very reasonable argument that for you and me, trade costs are actually not nearly as low as we're estimating in these models. Because suppose I actually did want to buy some goods in Denmark and sell them in the United States. How would I do that, right? I mean, at most what I can do is load things into my suitcase and try to sell them on the American equivalent of a DBA, right? So, I mean, which would be, I guess, Craigslist, which would not be easy. Just, you know, selling things on DBA or selling things on Craigslist is not easy. And, you know, I'm very limited in how many I can take in a suitcase. Plus, the plane ticket's expensive. So, you know, it's not actually so easy for me to arbitrage if I actually wanted to do it. On the other hand, there are firms that specialize in buying things in one country and selling them in another country. These firms are called wholesalers. So maybe what's happening is that wholesalers, you know, they actually can arbitrage away these currency differences. Maybe they do. But the thing is, they don't change their prices. Suppose they have some sort of market power and they're choosing their price. Suppose they have some sort of monopoly power, market power. Well, in that case, you know, the prices actually in these different countries, suppose there's pricing to market, those prices could be very sticky. They might be pricing based on, you know, not so much on their actual costs, but sort of on what the market will bear. It's very hand wavy, but that's kind of essentially what they say is happening here. It's that, you know, Zara knows that its different currencies are going to be changing all the time, but Zara is charging a price much higher than what it's paying anyway in Denmark and France and the United States. So, you know, small changes in their costs are not going to affect the amount they're selling the goods for in the various countries. So that's kind of the idea. Okay. So again, very hand wavy, but that's the solution in the book. So what do we learn from this whole chapter or this whole paper? Basically, there's a lot of puzzles in international macro that seem to be able to be explained by this unified idea that one, there are significant trade costs, and two, that goods produced at home and goods produced in foreign are not perfect substitutes. So you give me those two ingredients, and then also maybe imperfect markets for puzzles 5 and 6 with monopoly power or market power, and it seems you can go a long way to explaining these 6 puzzles. So this was a very influential paper. Now I just want to mention something. You know, it kind of feels like these models, it's like we have 3 different models for 1, 2, 3. You know, what do I want you to know for the exam? For the exam, I think it's what I think you should be able to do is in puzzle 1 and puzzle 2, I gave you sort of a problem that will also appear on one of the homeworks coming up. I think you should be able to solve those and then sort of just know what these different puzzles are, and then maybe have some intuition for how the trade costs and imperfect competition and imperfect substitution between goods can solve these puzzles or explain the puzzles. So I'll leave it there.